who's the past chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and is director of the training at the Minneapolis VA. And I'll hand it off to our speakers.
All right. Well, thank you. That's my cue. So, hi everybody. This is Joel Schmidt. I want to start by thanking Kevin and Monica in Division 19 and Division 18 for hosting this with us. Um, as was said, I was the chair last year of the Psychology Training Council. This year, Bernadette is the chair, and John and Wayne have served that role in the past. And so, it's really, I should say, first of all, an honor for me to share the stage with the three of them. They've all very notable in the field of psychology training, and so it's really fun to be a part of this. And the other thing that we really appreciate is this opportunity to speak to all of you who are, many of whom are considering internships. And one of the things that we've really talked a lot about on the Psychology Training Council is the desire to speak directly with our audience as best we can, and we don't always have that opportunity. So we really appreciate all of you taking the time to speak with us today and to kind of learn a little bit more about VA internships and whether it's kind of a right fit for your training goals and also how to do that. So I'm going to jump into my section in just a minute, but first I have to make a little commercial. And I want to talk about our training website. There was there was a change that occurred about a year ago in terms of the technical support that we receive for our website, and this has required our programs to make some shifts in how their brochures are hosted online. And I'm just telling you this because there are some occasions where if you do a Google search for a particular VA, you may end up with a dead link. So if you want to go to the definitive source where all of the 124 psychology internships are listed, please go to www.psychologytraining.va.gov. That is on the screen right now. And if you then search, go to the program link and search by program, you will find the current brochures. So like I said, please do that instead of doing an internet search for a specific VA in a specific city. That will work most of the time, but we've gotten reports that for some places you end up to the old site with a dead link. So just wanted to pass that on and ask folks to pass that on to other people that you may know who may be looking for VA internships. Okay, so for our section, we had some topics that we thought would be important to start with, and then as Kevin said, we will have plenty of time for questions and answers, and we'll be happy to take those. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what I would describe as cultural issues. In other words, what is it like being at the VA, and is it a good fit for me? And so I think there's a couple things to consider in this regard. Is this organization a good option for my training? And of course, we'll talk more about the benefits of VA training as we get into this. But if I do decide that, if it's a good option for me, then how do I best fit in? And so these are the kinds of things that are really helpful to understand as you're deciding about applying, and then of course be ready for as you go through the interview process. So just a couple things about the VA that I think will be helpful to know. The VA is a huge government-run healthcare organization. Probably goes without saying, but we are the largest trainers of psychology in the country. As I mentioned, we have 124 separate internships across the country, and and there's a lot of benefits to that. But then there are also, again, you have to realize you are in a large organization. And it's also very mission driven. So service to veterans is really the defining purpose of why we're here. And the missions include great things with training and research, and that's a real plus side with the VA, but you also have to realize the principal mission is providing health care to Americans veterans. And so, and I bring this up because sometimes people have questions about this. Many people who have not necessarily worked in the VA before kind of wonder, would I fit in here? And I think in order to fit in, there's a couple things that you need. First of all, you need to decide that you are interested in veterans' perspectives and values. The veterans as a group are very heterogeneous, so we don't want to overgeneralize, but there are some common themes. Their service was very important to their identity and may have had both negative and positive aspects. So that's the population that we work with. And as I said, some people come to us and they haven't had much interaction with veterans or military culture before internship. And I just want to emphasize a lot of people that shouldn't be any reason to be apprehensive about coming here. But I think it does, in order to succeed, you really have to think as if you are almost, it's like you're visiting a different country, where you would want to go and learn the language and the culture and be a sensitive observer. That's kind of, I think, what in some ways is a helpful mindset to think about it. And sometimes in my experience, trainees are nervous if they were not actually veterans themselves. Will the veterans accept me if I'm not a veteran? And I will say that in at least 99% of the cases, it's fine as long as you show interest and respect for them. And for that other less than 1%, your supervisors will kind of help you through that. So it shouldn't be a concern or detriment, but it's just, again, something that comes up, and it's kind of part of the learning process. As I mentioned, we are a huge bureaucracy, and so as such, flexibility and patience is required to fit in here. And sometimes, the experience for new people coming makes sense, and sometimes after you've been here for a while, you realize that they still don't make any sense. But a lot of times, there is some kind of a deeper understanding that you get for some of the things that at first seem a little hard to follow. So I think coming in, your new perspective is very valuable, but it's also important to come in with a bit of humility and realize that there might be more to the story than you first see. So I think, coming in, diligence, reliability, accountability, those are the things that are really important. And that's true, of course, with any clinical place that you work. So that's not necessarily unique to the VA, but it is important that um, you understand that. And of course, another thing to remember is that our training programs are supported ultimately by the U.S. taxpayers. And so there may be some formality in terms of the tour of duty and the requirements of things like that that you might not be used to. And along those lines, the VA is a highly visible organization. Americans in general feel very, very strongly about supporting veterans, but often might be in disagreement about the merits of a particular military action, for example, and the role of government in healthcare. So we have a certain visibility in that regard. It doesn't affect you too much, I think, as a trainee, as long as you kind of stay focused and professional. You don't have to worry about that stuff too much, but it is good to know. And I'm sure you've all seen there's been talk of the VA and the media and so forth. So again, just some things I think that are helpful to give some thought to before interviewing. And be prepared to display your willingness to engage in this culture through your actions and respect. Again, this comes quickly for most trainees, and many trainees, in my experience, are actually very surprised and at how stimulating and meaningful the work is. And I think I could use myself as an example of that. I didn't necessarily have a particular interest in this culture, but heard that VA had good training, and that's 23 years ago when I was an intern, and I have not left since. So I think there's a lot of really great things about working here, and just felt like it was helpful to provide a little bit of background. And so with that, let me turn it over to John, and John will talk a little about some of the differences between from one VA to the next.
Thank you, Joel. That was great. Following up on what you said, the VA is a big system, and OAA currently funds over 679 psychology internship positions, and in the past 10 years, the VA has more than doubled the number of training positions from about 432 in 2005 to over 1,100 at the current time. So we accomplish a lot of training. And like Joel said, I'm also someone that trained in the VA for their internship, and I've been here for about 20 years at this point, and it's a great place to work. But my role in speaking with you today is talking a little bit about the dimensions of the VA and the different types of training programs. And I have to say that they differ greatly by size, by the type of program, and by the type of training philosophy. So for example, some VA training programs across the country are quite large. There are some programs that have as many as 18 interns, and some of the biggest programs are places like Boston, Palo Alto, and San Diego that have well more than 10 interns. And then some of the smallest VAs have just 2 interns. So you can imagine there's a wide range of experiences based on the type of VA that you go to. So I like to tell prospective interns that you got to think of it a little bit like when you're selecting a college to attend. Do you want to go to a big one? Do you want to go to a small one? And you have to think about the size of the training cohort that would make a difference on the type of experience that you want. So also you'll have to think about how the program, especially a bigger program, might correlate to a number of different supervisors and a range of different opportunities. So within the VA, there's a big range in terms of size. Second, you need to be aware about the various types of VA internship training programs, and there's a lot of variability. So one type of VA internship training program are very broad and generalist type of internships that could be housed within a single VA or across a couple of VAs. We will have track-oriented internships. My particular site is one of those, that while we teach broad and general competencies, we will do that within specialty areas such as clinical health psychology, clinical neuropsychology, PTSD, substance abuse, SMI, all different types of specialties. So the third type that you might want to consider are consortiums. So those are around the country, and this is when we pair with other local programs so we can get training experiences that are outside of the VA that might not typically be available within the VA. So for example, if someone was in a child rotation. So you can have a very broad and general VA internship, you can have a specialty track internship, or you can be part of a consortium. And then finally, I think you should be aware of the different training philosophies that are within VA internships. So we're not all the same. Some will profess to be more scholar practitioner, while others are more scientist practitioner and place a significant emphasis on research. So when you're considering VA internships, you have to see, okay, what is their philosophy? And also, to some extent, are they affiliated with a local medical school? For when they do, those relationships will probably influence your training. It can give you greater breadth and provide a greater variety of clinical settings in which you can train. You might, because of the affiliation, be involved in more interprofessional teams and have some increased opportunities for research. Conversely, you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA. So even at the most rural of VA training centers, a lot of these opportunities are going to be available, and they might have some additional benefits of working with rural populations and training in telehealth. So every VA training program shares commonalities, but overall they can be different. And I'd like to just finish up by sharing a little bit of data. In our VA Psychology Training Council surveys, we have found in the past few years that well over 50% of the interns have protected time for research or for scholarly activities. About 75% interact with interdisciplinary teams or other trainees on a weekly basis. And in 2014, over 75% of the internships had some rotations dealing with rural populations. So that's a little bit about the variability within the VA internships. And next, I'd like to turn it over to Bernadette.
Okay, thanks, John. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm actually using my smartphone to participate, so if someone cannot hear me, if you could send a little chat, but otherwise I will assume everyone can hear me. So my role is to talk a little bit about why one would choose a VA internship. I can honestly say I've done all of my training, including internship and fellowship in a VA, and I am a very strong supporter of VA training. And I think the most important reason why someone would want to choose a VA internship is that all VAs, regardless of their size or where they're located, are very invested and focused on training. All supervisors within VA have training and supervision as a part of their job description, so it is an integral part of what they do on a daily basis, and therefore they have the time and the dedication and the commitment to training. So you can always count on quality supervision, quality didactics, and the opportunity to work alongside your supervisor. So certainly number one on the list of why a VA internship is because VAs are very much focused on training. Following up on what John said earlier, another reason to pursue a VA internship is the diversity of the patient population. Certainly we are working with veterans. You may have some opportunity to work with caregivers of veterans, but within the veteran population, there is certainly diversity of age, race, ethnicity, SES, rural versus urban. So you'll get a nice cross-section of the population with which to practice your clinical skills. VAs are very focused on evidence-based practice or evidence-based treatment. So you will have the opportunity to really focus on and learn a variety of EBPs from folks who themselves have gone through training on the various EBPs. And so when you leave your internship program, you will have strong both theoretical knowledge of as well as the application of various EBPs for a variety of different disorders. Certainly, if you are considering a VA career, I would strongly suggest a VA internship. It will give you the opportunity to learn about the VA system, to gain some experience working within the VA so you can decide whether a VA career is for you. And even if you're not sure that you want to consider or pursue a VA career, again, working with the variety of different types of patients that present within the VA will give you experience that you can then parlay into other types of environments or other types of facilities where you work in the future. Certainly the funding of your stipend on VA internship is stable, and it matches very well funding of other VA other internships across the country. So certainly having a stipend, health insurance, time off in the form of what we call annual leave, sick leave, all of those are important self-care types of things that certainly we promote within the VA internships. So those are just a snapshot of reasons why you might want to consider a VA internship. So I'm going to move this on and pass the baton to Wayne, who will take it from here.
Thank you, Bernadette. I wanted to talk about, and some of this is general advice for VA non-VA internships as well too, is applying to a range of programs. So as you're considering internship, think about the number and different types of programs that you want to apply to. And it's very important to make sure that there is a range in there. Some could be very competitive, and some should be less competitive. Now, I would give the caveat that you should never apply to a site that you really would be unhappy going to, but there really should be kind of a range in there. The APEC match data has said that modal is about 10 applications, but we know that no more than 15 has increased the chances that somebody would match. And so to consider that as you're looking at that range, and probably as you're considering, I would recommend that maybe you go on the high end and then you could weed some of those programs out as you start exploring them. So how do you go about this process? I would suggest also developing a spreadsheet with different kind of key factors about sites and then strengths and weaknesses in terms of their fit for you. But one of those could be elements about the competitiveness. A suggestion would be going to the APEC directory online, where is a place where most people are learning about internship programs. And so how do you tell how competitive a site is? Some of that may be by reputation. You hear from advisors or students that have gone on internship already. But the directory online for APEC has information for every program about the number of positions, the number of applicants that they typically get, and they'll delineate over the past, I think, 5 years the number of applicants they've had per positions. And then there's also a field in there, not every program fills it out, but most do, is what doctoral programs have their interns come from, and it can give you a sense of your background and training and how competitive you may be for that particular site. Now, if it's really a terrible fit, then I would suggest probably not applying to that program. If it's a little questionable, you could do some research. You could even email training directors. And although we are very busy, we are happy to answer relevant questions. The caveat I would say to that is read through the websites of the program and don't ask a training director a question that is easily discerned from the information they have publicly. It doesn't make for a great first impression. So as John had mentioned when he was talking, VAs are very different. So there really is a range in competitiveness. There's a range in the opportunities they have. There's a range in training experiences, research, whether research is being done in those sites. And those are all factors that you may vary on how important they are to you. And so weighing that information and considering that range as well. So also in considering that range, and one more caveat with that is when looking at the number of applicants and programs over the past 5 years, that information in the APIC directory, it is important to consider that 5 years ago, the match and balance was very different than it is right now. Now it's pretty equal, and many people are considering there really is no imbalance. And so programs that you may not be considered competitive for 5 years ago, you would likely be more competitive for now. And so it's important to consider that. Last year's data might be very helpful in helping you make those determinations. We'll also encourage people to consider some of the newer VA programs. The importance of applying to an accredited program is important. VA really stresses the importance of accreditation. But some of the new programs, just because they've not been around long enough, have not been able to get accredited yet. People who complete non-accredited VA internship programs are eligible for hire within VA. They're also eligible for VA postdoctoral programs. So that may not be true for other federal positions, but within the VA that is very true, and would hope that that wouldn't deter people from considering these programs. Some of those are in rural settings, and actually the VA offers really good opportunities for training in rural mental health. And a lot of the newer programs tend to be in more rural settings. So that is all I have for now, and I will turn this back over to John and Bernadette.
Okay, so John and I are going to give you a few interview tips for your VA internship interviews. I will list a couple, and then John, if you want to jump in and add a few to it as well, that would be great, because I need to mute my microphone while you're talking so that I can hear you. I think a couple of the most important tips that I would suggest would be, number one, be familiar with the internships information from their website or their brochure. Just as Wayne had mentioned, you certainly want to come across with a very positive impression, and sometimes it can be frustrating for your interviewers if they feel like they're just regurgitating the information that is actually already on their website. So certainly if you need some clarification, it's fine to ask about that, but you want to come in presenting as knowledgeable, like you've done your homework, and come in with some questions prepared that would suggest that you've really read the information and are excited about it, and then have some additional follow-up questions. Another important interview preparation would include being prepared for some typical interview questions, and one way to do that is to think of your experiences thus far in clinical settings and to come up with some standard sorts of vignettes or standard examples of what clinical work you have done that you might be able to use in response to certain questions. For example, the VA is really big on what we call performance-based interviewing. So it's not unusual to get questions such as, tell me about a clinical intervention that went as expected. Or tell me about a clinical intervention that did not go as expected. Or tell me about a situation in which you encountered an ethical dilemma and how did you deal with that. So if you can think of from your experience some common clinical encounters that you had, you will then be able to think on your feet a little more quickly and provide nice, detailed responses to those types of questions. John, what would you like to add?
Sure. So I think there's a number of things that we can consider. So going back to the actual interview, first I would say if you get an interview, that's awesome. You know, as Wayne was saying before, that some of these internships can be quite competitive. So that's no small achievement. And you definitely want to put your best foot forward. So no pun intended, but yes, you should dress professionally when you go to the internship interview. So as you might imagine, a lot of people are going to be in dark suits and and be fairly conservative. And you want to take your dress seriously because it does say something about you. You want to make sure you have a firm handshake, you make good eye contact, and when you don't overly rely on notes. You want to have a very good interaction with the person that's interviewing you. Like Wayne and Bernadette before me, have questions prepared. Sometimes in interviews, people will pepper you with questions. Like Bernadette said, you might have more theoretical ones. You're going to be asked at some point to please describe your dissertation. But, occasionally in the VA, people are going to have very unstructured interviews. And that can be a little anxiety provoking for people that they just want to chat. So you need to make sure that just in case you can structure the time and have questions that are thoughtful questions to be asking of the person that you're interviewing, and try not to be too casual when that happens. I think another tip that's been helpful over the years is that when you're unsure of a question, it can be really helpful to ask the interviewer to restate to make sure that you understand what the question is. And that can also give you a little time to figure out how do you want to best answer this. So try not to say things like, wow, that's tough, or I never thought of that before. But have a nice exchange and just put forward your best that you can, to let them know how much you've learned over the past few years in your doctoral program, and really, what do you want to develop over the internship?
And John, if I can add to that, I think it's also important
Sure.
when you're interviewing to remember that you are actually also interviewing that site. You want to be able to leave that site, have a good idea of whether or not it's a good fit for your training goals and your training needs, because eventually you'll have to put together your rank order list and submit it to the National Matching Service. And in order to do that, you really need to have a good understanding of that site, because there is nothing more miserable for an intern, as well as for a training program, to have an intern that's not happy with their internship. So, certainly it may feel like all of the power rests with the internship program with whom you're interviewing, but also you as an applicant have a lot of power in the interview, and you also have a strong role in trying to figure out whether that is a good site for you. So certainly, again, that goes into carefully crafting your questions to be sure that you're going to leave that interview with the information that you need.
I 100% agree, Bernadette. And the same goes when you meet with collateral staff or you meet with current interns or fellows. Be thoughtful of the questions that you ask them so that you understand if that's going to be a good fit for you. 100% agree. Did you have other things that you wanted to add, Bernadette, or did we also want to invite, Joel or Wayne or anybody to have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I'm done. We can turn it back over.
Okay, yeah, this is Joel. I did have just a couple things I wanted to follow up on. First of all, going back to Wayne's comments about the issue of a range of competitiveness. We did a presentation like this last year, and one of the things that I think surprised us was the comments that came in, and there were a lot of people, it seemed like, who had this perception that they just wouldn't be competitive for a VA internship. They had this perception that VAs don't look at people with PsyD degrees, or they don't look at people from professional schools, and that really surprised us because we didn't understand that to be the perception, and certainly is not the reality. So I just wanted to say that, like, if you're in good standing in your graduate program, the door is probably open for you. But one of the ways to think about that, and this again is just building on what Wayne had said, was if you have some geographic flexibility, and I appreciate that not everybody does, but if you do and you're willing to look at some of the more out-of-the-way places, we have, in my opinion, some fantastic training programs, and there is, particularly that Bernadette talked about, there really are some kind of common standards across the VA, and there's so much sharing that we do across programs that you can really rely on getting good quality training at pretty much all of our sites. And so, if you can move to a little bit of out of the way place, you can really bump up your odds. And like I said, I think if you want it, pretty much everybody that's in good standing probably can land a VA internship. So just encouraging folks to be flexible about that. And really take a look at the sites. And as Wayne said, the new sites that have not yet received accreditation, you can still go there and you can still, get VA jobs and postdocs, etc. The only other thing I wanted to add was in talking about interviewing, just a little insider tip. When you go to interview, be nice to everybody. You might be surprised at how frequently people shoot themselves in the foot because they're nice to the people that they think are evaluating them, and then they're not nice to either the current interns or to the clerical staff or that kind of thing. I promise you that will sink your ship. So just, again, insider tip. It hopefully goes without saying, but you are presenting yourself professionally with every person that you meet when you go to that facility. So those are just a couple points that I wanted to add.
Wayne, can you hear me? Yeah. One more thing that I would add, and it's just echoing something that John had said, was be very familiar with the materials of the program. Know what it is inside and out as best you can. If there's things you don't understand, generate questions. Have a long list of questions that you could ask different people at the program. People, even in interviews, they may just not want to chat, but they will give you an opportunity to ask questions too. And to show that you've really gone through their materials in a thorough manner shows that you're interested, and people will make they'll draw a link between how you approach that and how you may function as an intern. So that's something that you can really do ahead of time, and the more familiar you are, the less anxious you're likely going to be through that process, and that can be helpful.
Hi, this is Bernadette. I was looking at the chat box, and someone was asking, what types of experiences might be helpful in graduate school to prepare for a VA internship. I know that the concern was that not every graduate program or every student in a graduate program has the opportunity to do a VA practicum. And so, how would one prepare for a VA internship or gain experience that would look good for a VA internship site? I think, my suggestion would be to, number one, do practica with adults. Certainly working with all children would not be helpful in a VA, and certainly would not make your application look very competitive. I know that might sound very basic, but I just put that out there. Also, working with a range of adults who present with a variety of disorders. So I guess what I'm thinking is, rather than just working at the College Counseling Center with students who may have adjustment disorders, it would be important to work at maybe a community mental health center where you will have experience working with adults who present with mood disorders and anxiety disorders and trauma disorders and personality disorders and substance use, working in a psychiatry clinic within an academic medical center, or even working in an inpatient population. Again, just trying to gather a range of experiences with various different disorders among the adult population, I think would be helpful. I don't know if my colleagues want to add anything to that.
This is Joel. I would just agree. Yeah, I mean, we see a fair number of people who do have VA experience, and we see a lot of people that don't, and certainly that is not a competitive disadvantage. I think that, I guess one way to think about this, though, is that when you apply for an internship, you are kind of telling a story. And the story that you're telling is, here is why your VA facility is right for my training. And so, like Bernadette was saying, if you've done everything working with kids to this point, it's a little bit puzzling about why you'd want to come to our facility that has only adults. So I think that's the point, is to kind of tell that story about how, a VA internship is kind of the next step in the sequence of your training. Because, as we've kind of implied, selection is obviously anxiety-provoking for you as the applicant. It's actually pretty anxiety-provoking for us as training directors as well. And part of what's hard about it for us is trying to figure out, who really wants to come here, who would be a good fit. And so kind of that's part of the story that you're telling, is here's why I think your facility would be a particularly good fit for my internship, for my next needs. And, and say I like to work with veterans. I haven't had the chance so far, but here's how some of my previous experiences kind of set me up to be able to benefit from a VA internship.
This may be a good time. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them into our question and answer box on the left-hand corner of the screen.
We can start going through these questions. I'll read them out aloud, and then any one of our panelists can answer them, and we'll go in order that we've gotten them and try and get through as many of them as we can. First question is, in terms of range of competitiveness of sites, what is considered a safe, competitive, or middle ground site?
I can take a stab at that one. It's very individual to the applicant. So really is going to the APIC website, looking at the data of the program, looking how well you fit the qualifications, the type of applicants that have applied there, can give you really a sense of that. It's not always like an exact ratio of applicants to positions, but there are many factors that fit into that. And you can tell what is the program looking for, and often their websites will give information about the qualifications. So for example, if it's a clinical science program and they do a fair amount of research, and this answers another question that was posted too, and they accept 90% or have a strong preference for PhD over PsyD, and you come from a PsyD program and really haven't done any research, and it just doesn't seem like you're a really good fit, you're not going to be very competitive for that. So it's really, you need to look at a bunch of programs and then determine kind of that middle range versus a very competitive range versus less competitive range. Sometimes talking to your director of clinical training can help you sort that out because they're familiar with a lot of the internship programs.
And this is Joel. Let me just add, it's inherently uncertain. I mean, the market, having done this for several years now, one thing we've observed is that the selection market from year to year changes in kind of unpredictable ways sometimes, and certainly that's true for you. So, the best hedge against uncertainty is to diversify, and so it's probably hard to say exactly what the number is of applicants to slots that would make one competitive or not, but a lot of the advice I've heard before, which I think is good, is think about some of your sites you can consider stretch sites. In other words, that they're very coveted. A lot of people want to go there. But if it's something you want to do, give it a shot. And then have some more that are kind of mid-tier. And then, pick some that are, in terms of that range of competitiveness, maybe a little bit lower than you're hoping for. But as has been said previously, it's one that still has the things that you need for a good internship year, so that you could be satisfied if you went there. And I think if you kind of, put your portfolio together in that way, you will be kind of maximally prepared for the inherent uncertainty that that comes, because as Wayne said, the market is actually getting a lot better. There's been a real effort to create more internships. Historically, there's been a terrible imbalance of internships to applicants, and that has seen some really nice correction in the last few years. And so in that way, we're probably in a lot better shape than we were a few years ago. And so you can be optimistic about it. But again, it's uncertain, And so I think just kind of looking at those numbers the way Wayne has suggested and making sure that you pick slots, you pick positions that are kind of walking the range of possibilities. And as I said earlier, especially if you've got some geographic flexibility, that's always helpful as well. So hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of more context to figure that out.
All right. If anyone has anything else to add, they're more than welcome to. But we can also move on to our next question here. The next question is, there was a discussion about the stability of stipends during internship. Are there or have there been issues with government furloughs and students at the VA?
That's a great question. I don't know if anybody else wants to take that on. No, I mean, especially there's in the news, of course, that we may have another, it seems like every year now we have the threat of a government shutdown. I think we can say that our funding is very stable. Certainly that's been the case. In fact, if anything, we've been expanding over the last several years. There's been new internships added and so forth. So, we're a federal facility and we're subjected to kind of what happens in the political process. But I can certainly say, and, I've been in multiple administrations in the VA and, they might fund more positions or less positions, but I think everything that's funded is going to stay funded. And so I would say, to me, it looks like our money is probably a lot more stable than a lot of other organizations.
Okay, great. Next question. I think this was kind of answered already, but are students who have no prior VA experience at a disadvantage for being invited for interviews or being accepted?
Hi, this is Bernadette. I'll field that one. Again, I think Joel made the wonderful point that in your application, it's important for you to tell your story and to very nicely describe how your prior training would prepare you for a VA internship, and then also more importantly, why a VA internship would be a good match for your training goals. So, I mean, certainly if someone has experience in a VA practicum, that's good because we know that they have some experience with the VA way and working with veterans, but certainly we as training programs realize that the number of VA practicum opportunities is limited. And so, again, just getting a nice breadth of practicum training and being able to discuss how this would prepare you to work in a VA, and again, how that site is a good match for your training goals.
This is Wayne. I would add to that if you've not worked in a VA, I don't think that's so critical or important, but if you've worked in similar like healthcare settings, so in my program, I'm more concerned that if people have never worked in large complex settings and they might be overwhelmed in, a very large medical center that has a bureaucracy, and whether people have the skills to be able to navigate that. So if you've worked in similar type settings, you could highlight that in your application materials, and I don't think that would harm your chances of matching.
All right, great, thank you. I think given the number of questions that we're getting, I'm seeing a whole bunch related to assessment experience and looking at hours questions around the hours listed in the APIC brochures. I'm wondering if anyone can speak to kinds of assessment experiences that VAs are particularly looking for, and then are hours a hard cap? Is it more flexible? Those kinds of questions.
Well, this is Joel. I'm happy to jump in.
This is Bernadette. I'll chime in again. I think this may be a little idiosyncratic to each VA. I will say, though, that most VAs, if they have an hour minimum, they typically use that as a cut to try and eliminate some applications. So typically on a program's website, they will be, if they are pretty firm with the assessment hour minimum, and some will even go as far to say, if you don't have this hour minimum, don't even bother to apply. That's because they use that as a cut. Beyond that, as far as types of assessment experiences, again, I really suggest and encourage diversity in assessment. So certainly some experience with the standard objective personality measures, MMPI, MCMI, some experience with intellectual assessment. Certainly if you're a neuropsych person, having experience with the common neuropsychological test batteries and neuropsychological test instruments would be important. But beyond that, just having some solid experience in report writing, being able to write integrated reports that integrate information from chart review, clinical interview, and whatever assessment measures that you would have would put you in a good place for not only your application, but also for being able to start your internship without feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of the veterans and the amount of data that you would have to integrate into reports.
This is Wayne. I would add that that can vary site to site in terms of what their expectations are in assessment experience. So we really need to look at the individual program. What are they requiring in terms of assessment background? I think as training directors understand that many doctoral programs don't provide extensive training in assessment, unfortunately, and a lot of applicants are coming in without extensive work in that area.
All right. Moving on to some of the next questions. There's one in particular here on who to be using for letters of recommendation. I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to who people should be choosing for that kind of extra letter of recommendation, or if there are options for additional letters of recommendation, who should they be choosing?
Well, this is John. My thoughts on that are, you need, okay. You probably are going to have one from your dissertation advisor. They're going to know you fairly well and be able to speak to your research and your overall development as a trainee. But then I think the other letters are going to be tailored to the type of place and the type of track that you would hope to have an internship experience. So for example, if you really want a neuropsychology track internship, I would expect that at least one or two of your letters would address your skills in neuropsychological assessment and intervention. Same thing whether it be PTSD or if you wanted to have a more generalized therapy type of experience. That again, you want to put your best foot forward in talking about what your background is and who you are to the program. If you think you could do that in 4 letters, some programs are going to be open to that possibility, but sometimes they just want to review 3. So you just want to make sure that you get the best letters that you can. Most people are going to have very strong letters. They're selecting the people that choose them. So make sure they're good, because I think sometimes if you have a negative letter, that can hurt your application.
Yeah, and this is Joel. Just to add on that, I think that, yeah, there really is a difference sometimes in letters in terms of how well the writer knows the applicant. And certainly it's in your best interest to know somebody, to get writers that have really known you over time and in multiple contexts. You know, if you happen to have somebody that might have been a clinical supervisor and you've done some research with, that's ideal. It doesn't have to be that, but I think if you tend to find people that are just pretty, you know, like you took a couple classes with them or something like that, that's certainly not going to look as good as if you have somebody that has really knows your work. So I guess what I would add.
Says Wayne, my recommendation always is to, when you ask somebody, is ask, can you write me a really good descriptive letter? Sometimes we get letters that are a paragraph long and it just doesn't say much about the relationship or how well the person knows them. And I think a lot of people, if they can't write you a good letter, if you ask it that way, they'll still let you know.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we can get one last question in if we have time, because we've got two people who have asked about opportunities for diversity experiences in the VA, especially around sexual minorities and transgendered clients.
Let me just respond quickly because we are unfortunately at the end of our time. That is actually a big emphasis area in the VA right now. There's been a lot of push towards kind of addressing that issue. As you guys probably know, the history is that there was the don't ask, don't tell policy in the military, and so a lot of that stuff was kind of not officially discussed in the military, and there were a lot of challenges around that for people. So a lot of our population, has struggled with those kinds of issues, and as a result, the VA has really put some very formalized resources together in terms of dealing with sexual diversity issues. So that is something that actually does get a fair amount of attention with VA now.
And I would also say that there are programs that at the fellowship level have specifically funded LGBT fellowships, and you might also want to search on those programs to get a sense what also might be accomplished at the internship level at those facilities. But I'm sure that many VA internships across the country are going to address this in one way or the other.
I do apologize that we have run out of time. I know that there are still a few questions left in the Q&A section. I would offer that if anyone has any leftover questions they'd like answered, they can email Dr. Roy. Her email address is in the discussion notes. And then you can also email me at the Division 19 Student Rep at gmail.com email. And I'll do my best to try to answer some questions as well, having just gone through the process and doing my internship at a VA currently.
I want to thank everyone for attending, and I especially want to thank our speakers for providing a lot of valuable information. I kind of wish I had had this years ago when I had applied for internship. As just to echo what Kevin mentioned, if there's any questions moving forward, feel free to email myself or Kevin, and we'll try to at least guide you in the right direction to where you can get those questions answered. And I also want to wish everyone best wishes on the internship match process.
Yeah, and this is Joel. I do have to sign off, but it's been great. Thanks everybody for taking the time to speak with us, and again, we're very appreciative that you're interested in pursuing training with us.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you for our wonderful speakers who've been able to spend the time here today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email us, and we appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And if anyone has friends or colleagues who wanted to take a look at the recording of this, it is recorded and it will be going out in about 1 to 2 weeks, and I'll make sure that gets distributed out to everyone. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, and we wish you the best of luck on the internship process.
Thank you.